I have spent literally hours and hours of my life, even days, even years of my life, using one of these cement mixers. While I was in university, I worked as a brickies laborer. And every time I see one of these, it reminds me of the hours, days, even years of my life that I spent working hard, struggling to make a living while I was going through university. Every time I see one of these, it also reminds me that there are a lot of Jesus followers, a lot of Christians who spend days, years, hours of their lives trying to struggle through the Christian life to live out the lessons that Jesus taught. Today, by the end of this video, I want to share with you a secret to living out the lessons that Jesus taught. And it's not because you haven't heard the lessons before, but it's because of this secret we're going to discover in this video that I think so many of us struggle to live out the lessons he taught. And as a bonus, I'm going to share with you a little secret of how this cement mixer ties in with following Jesus. So let's go back to the end of last century and I'll share with you the story of the cement mixer. So it's about 1998, 1999. I'm in university and I'm working my way through university by working construction jobs, primarily as a laborer. Every job that I had, I would be assigned to a craftsman. Sometimes I was assigned to labor for a plumber, an electrician, carpenter. But most often I was assigned to a bricklayer. In fact, I spent almost 2 years of my life as a brickies laborer for one particular bricklayer from England. It was the closest thing that I got to an apprenticeship during my years of university. I learned a lot from that bricklayer. I learned how to mix cement. I learned how to lay bricks. I learned relationships on a construction site. I even learned a little bit about site management along the way. But probably one of the greatest lessons that I learned along the way was how to have a comfortable morning tea or smoko. The keys to having a comfortable lunch or morning tea or afternoon tea on a construction site are really just three things. A really comfortable foldable chair. Not one of those cheap camping chairs, but spend a little bit of money and get yourself a comfortable chair. The other thing you need is a really good lunchbox. Not a small lunchbox like the one that you took to school, but a really large one because you're going to need enough food to last you the whole day. And then finally, a good thermos, because in order to really enjoy lunch or morning tea on a construction site, you need to have a hot cup of tea, and a good thermos is the key to that. See, being an apprentice or a laborer for the bricklayer taught me more than just how to lay bricks or mix cement. It actually taught me a lot of life lessons along the way. In fact, my love of utes comes from my relationship with the bricklayer that I worked for those many years. He let me drive his ute almost every day to pick things up from the hardware store or to go grab extra supplies. And I fell in love with utes during that time. And still to this day, I love having a ute. See, when you're an apprentice to somebody, you actually learn more than just the skills they're trying to teach you. You learn a lot about the lifestyle that they live as well. I don't know about you, but perhaps you've had somebody in your life that taught you some life lessons. Not just skills that you needed in life, but some lessons along the way of how to live your life. Maybe for you it was a teacher. Maybe it was a relative like an aunt or an uncle. Perhaps it was a parent. Maybe it was just somebody in the community that taught you some lessons, but really taught you a lot about life. That's what it looks like to have a relationship with somebody beyond just the skills that they can teach you. And that's a lot of what it looked like to have a relationship with Jesus as a follower of his in the first century. In fact, this idea of apprenticeship is what having a relationship with Jesus looked like if you were one of the first followers of Jesus. In the first century, when Jesus was alive, it wasn't unusual at all in the Jewish culture for somebody to be a rabbi like Jesus. In fact, there were lots of different rabbis. Jesus was referred to over and over again in the New Testament as a teacher. The Hebrew word was rabbi, somebody that was a great communicator and had a following of people. But in order to become a disciple of a rabbi, you actually had to be kind of an elite academic student. You would have gone through the regular schooling up to like age 12 for most young Jewish boys. You would have been the best of the best in your class, and then you would have been invited to go into kind of an extra type of school in a room that was just off to the side of the synagogue. And then if you were the best of the best by, say, age 16 or so, you would have been given an invitation from a rabbi to become one of his disciples. These rabbis had small groups of people that literally spent every waking hour with them, learning from them their way or their perspective on how to interpret the law of Moses, the Torah. Jesus was one of these rabbis. But instead of inviting the elite to join him as his disciples, Jesus invited everyday people to follow him as a disciple. That word disciple actually comes from a Hebrew word, talmidim, and rabbis had a number of talmidim that were followers of them. The word talmidim in Hebrew is best translated into English probably with the word pupil, follower, or my favorite translation is the word apprentice. Just like an apprentice in a trade, like a baker or a bricklayer, not only do you learn the skills of the master craftsman, but you oftentimes take on the lifestyle that they live as well. That's what apprenticeship looks like, not just in the 21st century, but that's what apprenticeship looked like in the first century as well. Jesus invited people to follow him, not just to hear his lessons. Thousands of people heard Jesus teach. Thousands of people learned the lessons that Jesus taught, but he only invited a few that took up the challenge of apprenticing under him to learn the lifestyle that he lived, not just the lessons that he taught. Mark, one of the first followers of Jesus, records for us some of those initial invitations that Jesus gave. Listen to these invitations that Mark has in his gospel. The first one he records in the first chapter was, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once, they left their nets and followed Jesus. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay, Jesus called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed Jesus. In Mark chapter 2, he records another invitation. Once again, Jesus went on out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. In Mark chapter 3, Jesus sends another invitation. He went up onto a mountainside and called to him those that he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. In Mark chapter 8, we see another invitation. Jesus, he then called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Jesus invited people to follow him. Jesus invited people to be a disciple, to apprentice under him, not just to listen to the lessons that he taught, but more importantly, to actually adopt the lifestyle that he lived. That's what it meant to be a follower of Jesus and to be an apprentice. It meant to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to behave like Jesus. So many Christians, so many followers of Jesus today, they spend most of their time focused on how they can behave like Jesus, and they miss the all-important truth of just being with Jesus. In fact, I don't think you can behave like Jesus if you don't spend a lot of time just being with Jesus. That's what apprenticeship is all about. It's being with the master. It's becoming like the master so that you can behave like the master. That's the invitation that Jesus gave in the first century, That's the same invitation to apprenticeship he gives today. There are a couple of things that I absolutely love about the invitation that Jesus gives us to apprentice under him. The first thing that I love is that the invitation is for everyone. In that verse that we just read in Mark, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple or apprentice. When he says whoever, Jesus means it. He literally means whoever. You don't have to be the best of the best or an elite academic. You don't have to have done certain things in your life or not done certain things in your life. When he says whoever wants to be my disciple, Jesus literally means whoever. That includes you, and it certainly includes me. The other thing I love about the invitation is that it's not an invitation to follow a bunch of rules and regulations. It's actually an invitation to relationship with him. See, that's why apprenticeship is so much better than just following someone. He actually wants a relationship with you. That's what I love about this invitation. So let me ask you a question. Are you a Christian or are you a disciple, an apprentice? In the New Testament, the word Christian is actually only used 3 times, as opposed to the word disciple or apprentice, which is used 268 times. It's easy for a lot of people to say, I'm a Christian, but it looks a lot different for us to say, I'm a disciple or an apprentice of Jesus. So my question to you today is, are you a Christian who just simply has an interest in Jesus, or are you interested in being an apprentice under Jesus? If you're interested in the latter, then I think it starts with that first goal of the apprentice, to be with Jesus. When I think of being with Jesus, I'm reminded of what Jesus said about that idea when he said, I want you to abide in me and I want to abide in you. He wants to do life together with us. Dallas Willard, the famous theologian, describes abiding in Jesus or being with Jesus in these words. Let me read them for you. Willard said it this way. He said, when it comes to being with Jesus, the first and most basic thing we can and must do is to keep God before our minds. This is the fundamental secret of caring for our souls, he says. Our part in practicing the presence of God is to direct and redirect our minds constantly to him. Now, if you're just starting out, or even if you've been following Jesus for a long time, listen to these next words that Willard talks about in this practice of abiding in Jesus. He says, in the early time of our practicing, we may well be challenged by our burdensome habits of dwelling on things less than God. I love how gracious he is with that. I know for me, I have a lot of habits of dwelling on things that are less than God. But these habits are not the law of gravity. I love that line. What hope that gives us. These habits are not the law of gravity. They can be and must be broken. A new grace-filled habit will replace the former ones as we take intentional steps of keeping God before us. Soon, our minds will return to God as the needle of a compass constantly returns to the north. If God is the great longing of our souls, he will become the pole star of our inward being. I love how Willard describes that. He says that if we constantly redirect our minds back to God, over time there'll be a grace-filled habit that begins to develop in our lives where our minds are constantly being redirected back to him. That's what abiding in Jesus looks like, and that's what it looks like to be with Jesus. So I want you to just imagine this week for a moment, starting with this first practice of apprenticing to live out the way that Jesus lived by just being with Jesus, by keeping Jesus constantly on your mind. When Jesus described the way or the yoke that he invited his apprentices to take on, Jesus used these words that Matthew recorded for us. Listen to how great this invitation to following Jesus sounds. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Jesus says, come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. That's what apprenticeship looks like. To walk with Jesus, to work with him, and to watch how he does it. That's what we're going to be doing throughout this series. We're going to look at the lifestyle that Jesus lived. Then listen to this next phrase in the invitation that Matthew recorded. Jesus says, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Have you been burdened down by trying to live out the lessons that Jesus taught without focusing on the lifestyle that he lived? This series is perfect for you. And this week, I want you to think about nothing else but just being with your Master Jesus. Apprenticing under Jesus starts with being with him. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Learn to spend time being with Jesus this week and discover how you can live as Jesus described it, freely and lightly. That sounds like the kind of life that I want to live, and I bet you it sounds like the kind of life you do too.